I want to introduce Elizabeth Lohak. Elizabeth is Business Outreach Associate with the Empire State Development, New York's Economic Development Agency. She works with businesses, nonprofits, municipalities on Long Island to connect them with economic development resources that can help them succeed in our region and enhance local communities. She holds a Bachelor of Environmental Geography from Colgate University and is currently pursuing a Master's in Public Administration from Long Island University. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Hi everyone, I'll be introducing David Altman, who is moderating the regulatory compliance panel. David is a founding partner of Brown & Altman, LLP, and has extensive experience in real estate law, commercial litigation, and environmental law. He represents real estate developers and lenders, national and local retailers, and is involved in all phases of site development. David works with major national corporations, including Fortune 500 businesses, as well as local businesses in various aspects of the retail, commercial, and industrial sectors. As a land use attorney, he practices before municipalities throughout Long Island and New York City. And additionally, David serves as a transactional counsel to a number of commercial and residential lenders. So I'm going to give him a hand and welcome him to the table.
One quick second. You guys are kind of in the dark.
Yeah, I was going to say, really.
Step out a little bit into the light.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Great event, huh? Michael, we have 120 people. Excellent. How many folks, by the way, are actually members of the Long Island Food Council? Not quite half the room, so just a little plug for the council. I think you folks should really give some consideration to joining up. I think this is an incredible venture that Michael and his wife Elisa put together here. This is sort of a unification of the food industry here on the island from beginning to end, and I think it's worth your participation and support for the organization. I joined a couple of years ago. First event I went to was probably about 20 to 30 people, and now here we are at an industry event with 120 plus, so I think it's worth considering to everybody. Also, I'd like to thank Michael and Elise for inviting myself and my colleague David Pernick here this morning. Actually, David is going to be moderating this panel. David joined my firm last year. David, in terms of the Long Island-centric focus here, David is a Long Island resident, went to law school here at Toro, graduated last year, passed the bar the first time around, and has been with us for a year and a half. David worked during law school with the SLA, and knows a few of the folks here on the panel, is familiar with some of the licensing requirements. So David will be moderating the panel discussion, but one of the questions, I think Michael, you had asked this question, the zoning, I do a lot of zoning and land use from one end of the island to the other. Does zoning impose a different level of regulation in terms of what you can and cannot do within a particularly permitted district? Well, the answer to that is obviously yes. And you need to be cognizant of that fact, and it varies obviously from municipality to municipality. So when you engage counsel, not only for your licensing requirements and your application requirements in terms of obtaining that liquor license, whatever particular licensing may be, you need to understand what your development obligations are and what you cannot do as it relates to zoning. So just because you're in an agricultural district, you need to look what's permitted within the agricultural district. You may be engaging in a particular type of use that may not be permitted, or it may be specially permitted. And what that particularly means is that there are certain conditions or certain aspects of the use which the local municipality deems of a heightened, requires a heightened degree of scrutiny. And as such, there are additional conditions and additional process to go through. In addition, particularly here in Suffolk County, where we don't have sewers, right? Big issue, particularly for those who produce, is what do you do with the wastewater product that goes into the ground? Here in Suffolk County, we have very, very strict regulations in terms of how much wastewater you can put into the ground on a per acre basis. These are things you need to understand and engaging your professional team up front in terms of sanitary engineer, civil engineer, sitting down with the Suffolk County Department of Health or Suffolk DPW if in fact you are in a sewer district, to understand what you can and cannot do in that regard is very important. Another thing you need to be cognizant of, and we'll turn it over to David, from a transactional perspective, how many folks borrow money to finance their project and work with lenders? Okay. Well, you need to understand what conditions your lender is putting on the loan. Many loans come with a loan agreement, right? You need to understand what covenants are required in the loan in terms of what the lender will potentially allow. So be familiar with that as well. So in that regard, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, David Pernick. David, take it away.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, so I have some questions. If anybody else has questions, write down your card. Michael will come and pick it up and bring it to me. But I think just to start off, I know Tom and the chairman touched on this before, but some factors that each agency looks for when they're establishing jurisdiction with a liquor license or Department of Health license, what exactly do the different agencies look for? Yes.
I'm not clear on the question. You were asking what would get you an approval on an application of a liquor license? The factors?
Yeah, well, so what exactly does the SLA look for when they're determining whether you're going to be approved or not?
So, well, it depends, first of all, what kind of license you're getting. And that's for an on-premises, I'll start with the liquor store. For the liquor store, every liquor store application has to go in front of the full board. And in order for the full board to approve the liquor store application, we have to find, as a board, that the liquor store promotes the public convenience and advantage. What that is undefined. There are factors that we are supposed to look at, such as population increase in the area, other liquor stores in the area, their sales totals. Their sales totals indicating whether they're going up or down. If they're going up, it would indicate a increase in demand for alcohol. If they're going down, the opposite. We also look into the public and character of the individual that's applying for the liquor store. Has he been licensed before? What type of adverse history? So that is a pretty involved review. For an on-premise liquor license, basically it's what is your method of operation? Does the premises abide by all of the obligations of our law as well as your local zoning laws? And then we also look into the character and fitness of the individual as well. Those licenses do not all need to go to the board. We have what's called a licensing board that process. Once those license applications are processed, they go in front of a licensing board member who will then do a quick review of the application, in which case the majority of those get approved because it means they don't have an issue in the character and fitness or in the premises. Usually if there is an issue, it's something that we can fix during the application process. The ones where there has been either a cancellation with the person applying in their past history, if there's been a revocation, if there's been a cancellation or revocation on the premises that you're applying for, usually they'll have to come to the full board, and once again, the full board will do a similar review that the licensing board would do on what are you going to do at this location, music, hours, how big is it, and how do you explain what happened as a result of your last license. But it's a pretty involved process, so I don't really want to go that deep into it, but I'll let the Department of Health now answer.
Good morning, everyone. So from the Department of Health's perspective and by way of introduction, as you can all read my bio, I don't have someone to read it for you. I'm Assistant Chief of the Bureau of Public Health Protection in Suffolk County Department of Health Services. We oversee the entire food protection program in Suffolk County. There are 4,800 plus permanent food establishments in Suffolk County. And for new businesses or renovated businesses, basically, we begin with the menu. It's all menu-based as far as obtaining a permit to operate a food establishment. We make no difference. There's no difference to us between a food and beverage establishment. We issue the same kind of permit. It is simply restricted or conditioned as to what exactly you can and can't do. Again, based on the menu and the review of the equipment you have to support that menu within your food or beverage establishment. The process that is involved is to submit the applications, technical drawings, layout plans, of the interior of the facility, determine if you need an environmental review of any kind, which would include, as David mentioned before, the wastewater that's produced by the establishment, whether it's in a sewer district or whether there's an on-site sanitary system that needs to be reviewed. That's all part of the review process. Once the plans are submitted to us, we review them. In my bureau, we average 2 to 2.5 days for the review. If there is an environmental review that's required, that's going to take a significantly longer length of time. That's in a different office within the health department. And again, they generally have a more comprehensive review than we do, conducted by their engineering staff. And that can be measured, unfortunately, in terms of months as opposed to days. Once you're notified of any deficiencies or inadequacies in a plan, you return that information back to us. It becomes approved. We schedule a pre-operational inspection. You then would be able to obtain that within a day or so, and a permit is issued basically on the spot to operate. The permits are annually renewable. These, again, are for permanent types of operations, including, when I say permanent, I also mean mobile operations, those that have annual or biannual permits. We also issue permits to temporary food operations, any fairs, feasts, festivals, carnivals, street fairs, and the like, serving food and, in certain cases, beverages at these types of events do require permits also. The permitting process for those are on an as event or per event basis, so it's not as involved as the back and forth with the plan review process.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Angela Montalbano. I am representing the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. So we are the Food Safety Division. And so just to give you a little understanding of what the Department of Agriculture is responsible for, we have jurisdiction over large food manufacturers, retail grocery stores, retail butchers, wholesale manufacturers, wholesale bakeries, poultry slaughterhouses. We do have jurisdiction over commercial, any kind of liquor for commercial facilities, and anything that is farm designated. So with that said, there's a little confusion with who do you actually belong under, whether it's the health department, statewide, whatever local health department that you may be dealing with. Here we're Suffolk County, so there's a consistent question as to whose jurisdiction do you actually belong under. So in addition to that, we have several different licenses. Most of you will have what we call a 20-C food processing license, which encompasses just about everything. We have a retail food store license, which is for perishable items. We have a warehouse license. We have a slaughterhouse license. We have refrigerated warehouse licenses. But the bulk of you will be dealing with the 20-C food processing license. I will add that if you are a farm designated whatever, cidery, brewery, whatever you may be, there is no license. You're exempt from the department's food processing license at that point. That does not mean you don't have an inspection. You need to have an inspection for the basic sanitation, the GMPs, and the question was, what do we actually look for? So we do look for sanitation. We look to make sure, if you have the 20-C food processing license, if you're a manufacturer, there's a regulation. It's a good manufacturing practices regulation. It's actually been updated by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. It's now, it used to be the GMP's Part 110. It is now Part 117. Many of you do fall under that. So it's a federal regulation that New York State Agriculture has adopted. So it's under the Preventive Controls Rule. It's Part 117. You can look it up. It's on the department's website. It's on FDA's website. So the state adopted that as their regulation now. So if you're a wholesale manufacturer of anything, even the commercial brewery, you will need to follow the GMPs, the good manufacturing practices. If you are not, then you go under the retail regulations. So we have regulations for that as well. So if you're a manufacturer, you need to have basics, a one-bay sink for cleaning, washing, sanitizing your equipment, free of insects and rodents and all that kind of fun stuff. And then basic sanitation. If you're on the retail end of it, then you would need to have a 3-compartment sink. The regulations are pretty similar, but the GMPs, they're a little more loose. So there's no hot water temperature. There's no footage of where you would put this hand sink. So it's a little bit more loose, and we give you guidance as to what those would help your operation work better and smoother for good sanitary practices.
Where can we find guidance for what is looked for in an inspection?
So we'd like Ann to hold the questions until at the end, and we're gonna get some, if possible.
Okay, and just to go off what Angela was saying, I'm gonna go with our first question from the audience. So a winery that sells for consumption on premises must offer food for sale, and as the chairman mentioned before, that can include all different types of food. Does this food offering fall under Ags and Market, or does that go under Department of Health or County Health?
So as I mentioned, there's always a question about jurisdiction. It will not go away. So the New York State Department of Health sat at the table with the Department of Health statewide and also the Department of Agriculture. And what they do is they create what they call as a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, which clearly delineates whose responsibility and whose jurisdiction goes under what. So a quick, easy answer is, to that question, if there's a farm, well, is that for farm, or was that a plain old winery or a farm winery?
Just a
So
plain
if
old
it's a
winery.
winery and you're considered a commercial winery where you're manufacturing, you're wholesaling, there should really be no food happening there, right? But if you're a winery where you're sitting down, you have food service there because SLA requires food, if you're conducting 50% or more of food service operations, then you go under the health department. So that's virtually how the MOU is written. It's 51% or more is what determines whose jurisdiction you belong under for food service. Because the health department is operating for food service. And New York State, we handle food service, but we're mostly groceries and food manufacturing. So when it comes to food service, it goes to the health department. Would you like to add to that?
I'll add a little bit to that. So just to kind of expand on what Angela said, because this is a very common question, as she said, regarding in my winery, brewery, distillery, what have you, what is the limitation on the food that I can serve? Rather than saying it's done on a case-by-case basis, which unfortunately, I mentioned the menu basis is how we do our plan reviews earlier. It's maybe not as complex as that, but it is very similar. So the types of food, I mean, it used to be the old, it almost was a joke that, well, you can serve cheese and crackers in a winery. Well, nobody serves cheese and crackers in a winery. You might serve cheese and crackers, but you serve a lot more than cheese and crackers in a winery if you're doing tastings. So it's been specifically designated in the MOU between health, which again, state health and the Suffolk County Department of Health follows state health guidelines, and Ag and Markets, in that you basically, any raw vegetables, raw fruits, cheeses, cured meats, they can be sliced, they can be displayed, as long as there's no complex assembly or heating of foods, such as raw animal proteins, that require a specific cooking temperature as a kill step, that require refrigeration or cooling. Basically, we're all about preventing foodborne illness and making sure that the safest possible food is served within Suffolk County. So one example that I sometimes use is nachos, okay? There are nachos and then there are nachos. So if you have corn chips in a bag and you open a can of fluorescent yellow horrible cheese and pour that on top, well then you don't need a permit from the health department. That's not food service. That falls under the licensing from agriculture markets. If, however, you want to create your nachos grande and you want to slice jalapenos and you want to dice up tomatoes and you want to brown ground beef and spice it up and put that on your nachos and heat that up, that's food service. There's a lot more to what that process is than the former description of food. So that's how we figure out whether you're providing food service or not. So again, in an alcoholic beverage manufacturer, and again I'm talking not about farm exempt type operations, but wineries, breweries, distilleries, etc. You basically are going to be under one license or another, and there's very few instances where you would have both. One for the beverage manufacturing and one for the food operation. So if you have that, then you need 2 licenses. If not, you're going to have 1 license. You're either a food establishment or a food operation, or you're a food manufacturer or a beverage manufacturer.
I have a question. With respect to the MOU that you mentioned, Angela, is that something that's a publicly available document such that the
It's
applicant
not
or
a
the
public-
applicant's
excuse me.
professionals?
It's not a publicly available document, as in posted on a website. It is foilable if someone wants to take a look at the copy of it. It's kind of dry reading and, applies to a lot of different things. How we coordinate illness outbreak investigations, water supply issues, those kinds of things.
Understood.
But it is a public document, yes.
And I guess the other thing I would ask in conjunction with that is bearing in mind the nature of the application and how involved it is based upon the applicant's prospective business practice. Do any of your respective agencies allow for pre-app meetings to determine what's involved and what the submission requirements are? Again, based upon anticipated expense. If I'm just doing off-premises sales, it's one thing. If I'm doing a major winery with food, et cetera, and I'm looking at a multi-million-dollar project, I want to have a better handle on what I'm ultimately going to be responsible for providing to you to make sure that that process goes smoothly the first time around, not the third, the fourth, or the fifth, because
Certainly.
nobody wants multiple comment letters.
So the best thing that anyone can do, whether you're looking to open a new business or to renovate an existing business or a change of use in a business that used to be something that you want to make it something different, the best thing that you can do for yourself is to do your due diligence. Have a conversation with the regulatory agencies because you're entering a business or continuing a business in which there are obviously, as we've already established today, a lot of regulations from a lot of different agencies you need to comply with. And so having a conversation with the regulatory agencies in advance before you make any kind of investment or capital outlay is the best thing that you can do, because you'll understand without spending any money what your options are, what you can and can't do, whether you're even in the right agency as far as where you thought you might be regulated by agricultural markets, but maybe you do need to get a permit from the health department, and so you can allow for enough time with that. So having these conversations in advance, there are any number of other folks at the health department with decades of experience, such as myself, that can answer questions for you with a simple phone call, or of course even a meeting if you've got something more tangible, you want to show some plans to us or what have you. We don't do reviews on the spot or walk-in reviews. However, any kind of information that we can provide in advance that would be helpful to you to get you open as quickly as possible, we would do.
And I would elaborate on what Steve said. For New York State Department of Agriculture, unfortunately, we do not have a plan review process in place. It's not in our regulations. So as they do in Suffolk County, they do have a plan review process. So it does kind of guide you, that does guide you a little bit. So with us, we don't have that. So we are always willing to work with you. I can't tell you how many people that I talk to, countlessly in the beginning stages of their process. We don't go out into an empty building and say, okay, this is where you need to do this. I will provide you with all the regulations you need. Everything's on the website, but I will email it to you. And then we talk about every single step that you're going through. So you want to call me in week 1, I have no problem with that. Start with week 1, and then I go with you every week until you get there. It doesn't matter. So, in thinking of that, the only problem that we sometimes run into is business plans change. So you might start off thinking that you're going to be whatever, and then as your plans and your sales change, your business changes, and then sometimes the jurisdiction changes as well. So that's just a sticky point that we can't foresee, and unfortunately you can't either, obviously, right? So that, we do get a bad rap sometimes. They say, well, we've had the Department of Agriculture for 20 years, and now you're telling us we need to go to state. But that's not what we're deciding. It's just the way your business has morphed into, which is probably a good thing for you. That means you're doing better and your business is booming. So, take that into account, that sometimes things change as you're moving along. So we can certainly guide you through this process. And we work very well together, not only in Suffolk County, but throughout the state. We work together very well with the other agencies, and we're always here to help you.
Okay, and then going off that, I kind of want to shift this to the SLA. With changing businesses, considering the amount of time it takes to get a license, if there are changes to the applicant throughout the application process, if they have new investors or an investor leaves, what should the applicant do in that instance to keep the application going?
Well, ideally, when you're applying, you should have your business plan modified. I was going to add to what they were saying. One, I encourage people to contact us particularly in a complex licensing situation, to come in and meet with us before the application's even filled out, show us what you want to do, particularly on a diagram, and we'll try to work out with you whether you can do that or not. And we generally try to, you might have to change a couple things, but because our law is so old, it's not written for the modern day businesses. So we are forced to try to elbow things into places where necessarily they weren't meant to go. So I do encourage that to happen. I also encourage, as I mentioned before, the one-stop shop. The reason they call that the one-stop shop at Empire State Development is the governor set that up for the sole purpose of starting a craft beverage business. There's one person dedicated to that, and he is a contact with every agency that you're going to be required to deal with, including us. So his name's Stephen Fleming, and he can put you in touch with someone at our agency, put you in touch with New York State Tax, put you in touch with the TTB. To your question, ideally you shouldn't be getting investors while the application is pending. However, if you do, we do have an amendment process, but it likely is going to slow that process down. And as I said, I encourage everyone to apply for temps, particularly out here on Long Island, because they are done in, at this point, 1/5 the time that the other application is done.
And going off the temporary permits like you just mentioned, are there any plans to have temporary permits for breweries besides just retail premises?
The temporary permit was instituted, what year, Tom, do you remember?
You mean the change?
Legislative, yeah.
The change was done, so previously, a temporary retail permit was only available if you were buying somebody else's existing business. I want to say maybe 10 years ago?
So that's relatively new, and when that was done legislatively, we tried to do that across the board, particularly in New York City as well. New York City legislators did not want it for various reasons, so you cannot get a temporary license in New York City unless one specific instance where you're buying a already licensed establishment. And whether we're going to expand that or not, we're constantly trying to do that, but legislation is very, very difficult for obvious reasons I'm sure you're all aware of.
There was a bill introduced this past session. It was one of our departmentals, but it did not move through the legislature.
And that is something that we are going to try to do.
Okay. So New York State obviously has this 3-tiered system with liquor licensing. Mr. Chairman, can you just go through that briefly, and if you could explain what licenses certain licensees can and can't have together?
So the three-tiered system is basically manufacturing, wholesaling, and retailing. The manufacturer needs to sell their product through a wholesaler who then sells to the retailer. In certain instances, in the farm licenses, we have skipped a tier where the farm licensees can go out and distribute their own product and as well as sell on retail on their own premises. I mean, that's basically the gist of it, and the reason for it originally and still enacted today is what they call the Tide House laws. And as a result of the 3-tiered system, it's illegal for a manufacturer to have an interest in a retailer. And the point of that was, I believe, and Tom will correct me if I'm wrong, as he usually does, I believe so that there would not end up being a monopoly. If Budweiser was allowed to go out there and also own retailers, you'd see Budweiser everything and they would just overcome everything. And there are other exceptions to that rule as well, where the licensees cannot. We had an instance where this is how small your interest could be. We had a major corporation, international corporation, who happened to own pieces of retail hotels in Europe, and they were trying to buy what's the champagne company? Moet. And that ended up being a Tide House violation because they had a manufacturer and they own retailers already. What happens in many of those instances is they have what's done that legislatively they call them carve-outs. So they will pass a law that only applies to that one particular location, and they will carve it out of the Tide House law. We are trying to ease the state Tide House laws, which by nature are actually more strict than the federal tied house laws. But once again, that's a legislative process and it's going to take some time. You want to add to that?
I need to correct you.
Yeah.
Okay. Every manufacturer in New York State can self-distribute. Right? Not all, you don't have to, right? You can either self-distribute, you can use a wholesaler, you can do both. Most manufacturers, primarily wine, beer, cider, and mead, have retail privileges at your facility. You can't have a standalone retail site, otherwise you get a tight house issue. Distillers have much more restrictions about their ability to have retail privileges. Only, as of right now, only the farm distiller can do that. All right. Wholesalers, with one exception, can only wholesale product. There is an old beer wholesale license called the C license. Where's Ken? All right. There is it's the beer beverage centers, for lack of a better term. They have a wholesale license with a retail privilege. That's why they can sell beer without having to meet the grocery store inventories. And then for retailers, with one exception, they can only sell at retail. The one exception is what I mentioned before, the restaurant brewer, who can also brew beer and sell it at wholesale. But other than that, as the chairman was explaining, with the tight house law, which dates back to pre-prohibition because of trying to prevent the big brewers primarily from controlling the industry.
Okay, Tom, just to go off what you were saying before, so vineyards are allowed to sell direct to consumers, or all manufacturers can sell direct to consumers. Vineyards are allowed to mail wine. So,
But not all manufacturers. Distillers, only the farm distiller can sell at retail from the distillery. The other distillers, rectifiers, cannot.
okay.
All
All right, so, but vineyards are allowed to sell to consumers via mail. So, are there any plans to have brewers be able to do that? Or there's like these gift packages that you can order online where you get wine and beer, or all different products shipped to you directly from a third party. So does that violate the SLA, the ABCL? What's the SLA stance on something like that?
It probably does violate. Right now, as you said, only wineries and farm wineries. I believe there was a bill introduced late last year that would expand the privilege of cider producers, but that did not go anyplace. So even with respect to retailers, our package stores, our wine stores, can sell to direct ship to New York State residents. Out-of-state retailers cannot. So the only product that's supposed to be coming in from out-of-state is from a winery or a farm winery that has a direct shipper's license that we issue, which is why I know that the shippers, FedEx and UPS, have cracked down a lot on taking shipments because they don't know if they're coming from somebody who is licensed to do that.
Okay, now I'm going to kind of segue into something a little different. For these manufacturers, can you kind of go through the tasting rules that they would have to abide by, whether at their actual manufacturing facility or if they're doing tastings in a liquor store? And then kind of want to see what the Department of Health would say with what kind of licenses you would need to taste products out at different facilities.
That's a long answer. I mean, it's because you're talking about 4 different or 5 different types of beverages. If you want them to go through it, if you want us to go through one beverage, that'll be much quicker.
Let's go with liquor. So let's go with spirits. So what would be the tasting rules for that?
All right, for spirits, the only distiller that can conduct tastings at their distillery is a farm distiller. The sample size is, I think, 1/4 of an ounce. Right? Off-site, you're looking at, you can do tasting at a package store. You can also, like, as I mentioned before, get your marketing permit, which gives you the ability to do tastings at a number of locations and events. There is a size limitation for the samples of that as well. And that's, if you go to our website, all our advisories are there, and there is a marketing permit advisory and explains all the rules of the road to you, whether you're a distiller, a winery, or whatever.
Okay, and if we could pass the mic down to Steve. So Is there anything specific that the Department of Health would look for if I wanted to sample my product at a farmer's market or an event like that?
If we're talking about farm distillers, are we kind of focusing on distillers at this point?
Yeah, let's say farm distillers.
Okay. So, again, we're talking about two different types of operations, an alcoholic beverage manufacturer and a food service operation. So there is a level of food service or food that must be served as part of the SLA license. However, as long as it's maintained at the levels that the SLA requires to meet their definition of what a sample is, then we're not getting involved in that on the premises of the distillery itself. That's all going to be licensed by SLA. It's going to be regulated by agricultural markets if necessary. When we start to talk about other venues for service of alcohol, they're serving alcohol, serving orange juice, serving steak. It's all the same to the health department. We're, again, all about preventing illness. And illness can occur serving food from one person to another. This is something that's happened over centuries. So that's where our regulatory line is drawn, so to speak. In terms of serving alcohol or serving beverages, we would get involved if the operation starts to look like a tavern. If your sample sizes now are, you're mixing drinks, you are, serving, again, to, I guess, divert from alcohol. If you're serving, pints of beer, if you're serving 6 or 8 ounces of wine at a time, the health department's going to get involved in that, and you need a permit because it looks like a bar, and it is a bar, and the health department regulates bars. If we're talking about temporary food service, farmers markets are not regulated by the health department. They're regulated by the State Department of Agriculture and Markets. Angela might have a thing or two to say about that. Temporary food service, however, if you are providing samples of your product. For many years, we required that anyone and everyone who was going to be providing samples of a product, whether it's a distilled product, whether it's a hot sauce or a dip mix or something that you wish to promote at a temporary event, a street fair, for example, to promote your packaged product, we required you to obtain a permit for temporary food service. And that still applies. We have changed the permit process and the application somewhat to reduce the cost of that and to make it a little bit simpler. And as with all of our procedures and the rules that we enforce, we're always looking for ways that we can streamline the process, make it simpler for both us and for industry. And so we're looking into the sampling rules and whether or not we can continue or should continue to require a permit for providing samples at temporary events or temporary food service.
So to go further with what Steve mentioned, the State Department of Agriculture, that's food safety inspection, we do have jurisdiction over farmers markets. We do not allow any licenses to be issued at a farmers market. So we don't inspect farmers markets on a routine basis. We only inspect them on a complaint basis. So with that said, there are no licenses issued at a farmers market. There should be no processing happening at a farmers market because that's what requires a license, is any kind of food processing. We do, however, allow you to sample your products. So if it's a distilled product, we do allow you to sample that. There's no license required. So you can have a grocery store and have no food processing at all in that facility, but you sample any kind of food, and then that's not licensed. So you're allowed to do that. So it's the same thing at a farmer's market. And the state does not have responsibility or jurisdiction over any farm or any street fairs. As Steve was mentioning, we don't do the street fairs or any kind of a festivity of that nature that requires a temporary event type of a permit through the health department.
Okay, so I want to go back to the SLA guys for a question about transporting. Long Island has the ferry that goes to Connecticut, so are there any special licenses that a winery or a distillery or brewery would need to transport their own product on the ferry from Long Island to Connecticut?
I don't know. I'm sure there is, and I don't know.
So this actually came up recently. maybe with respect to that ferry, the trucking permit talks about being issued to a vehicle, which is defined under the vehicle traffic law. So we had an issue with, well, how do I transport my product while the vessel is in New York State? And we have issued what I would refer to as a one-off permit under our powers to issue a miscellaneous permit. So we have, when those situations are presented to us, our executive deputy commissioner and our deputy commissioner of licensing have the power to issue a permit for unique situations like that. So we would issue them what amounts to a trucking permit for the vessel for that purpose.
So the actual vessel would need the permit, not the producer, the person transporting it?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So what if that producer was just able to take their truck that they normally use to make their local deliveries and drive that onto the ferry?
But then they're covered, and if they...
So then they're still covered. If it's in their own vehicle and it's on a ferry
Right.
driving to a different state?
Remember that if you're using, you either have a trucking permit, or if you're using a vehicle, the vehicle has to be owned and operated by the licensee. So if it's ABC Winery, and you personally own the truck, that doesn't count. All right? The winery has to own the truck. But then that would suffice, and you wouldn't have to worry with the vessel. If the truck, and you would have a copy of your license, throw it in the glove compartment, you're good to go.
So there wouldn't be a separate trucking permit that a manufacturer would need if the entity that's manufacturing wholly owns the vehicle?
Right. But as the chairman just indicated, once you cross the state line, you got to worry about Connecticut.
Another question about shipping alcohol. So what would be the rules governing alcohol coming from a different state into New York if I was somehow ordered beer online from a brewery in New Jersey and they ship it to me? Would that be a violation of the ABCL?
Well, you as a resident, that brewer cannot ship to you. That's the first problem. So that's what's going to happen is when UPS or FedEx or the responsible trucker gets it, they're going to say, wait a minute, you're not licensed to sell in New York, we're not going to take the product. And that's been having a significant impact on the problem we were having with out-of-state product coming in illegally. Essentially, FedEx and UPS got a threat, a nasty letter from our counsel's office saying you better knock this off, and they've knocked it off.
I think one of the things that's coming up right now, people are probably recognizing, is that the technology and the use of the internet as a marketing channel is way ahead of what the laws currently state. And that creates serious uncertainty on how various business ideas can actually work within the law. And we're already seeing cases where people are leaping ahead and deciding to go forward with a business plan that clearly violates our law, although seems kind of sensible in the internet age where people are buying their product, at all tiers through the internet. So the recommendation here, since it is very difficult, is if you've got a business idea that involves multiple tiers or something that goes across state lines, come talk to us before you go forward. Because the fines are severe if you've broken the law without realizing it. And that's certainly happening more and more with internet-based business operations.
Okay, and just to piggyback off of that, so if a company has a license in a different state, does that have any meaning to the SLA in New York? Do they care? Does that benefit them in any way?
I'm not following.
So
they're licensed in another state? What are they doing? What are they doing in our state is the only thing we're worried about.
So if they want to bring product into New York, but they have a license in a different state,
They need to get the proper, whatever it is here would be, depending on what they want to do, you can get an importer's license, you can get a wholesale license. It depends on what they're doing, but they have to be licensed in New York.
One other thing, if they have a license on one tier in another state, it's going to have an impact on whether they can get a license in another tier. It's not just a tight house law violation if you're operating as a manufacturer and look inside New York and looking for a retail license inside New York. The tight house laws would implicate that as well.
Okay. For sales for off-premise, a package store, or a grocery store, or convenience store, can you just go through the different types of alcohol that each of those license classes would be able to sell, and the difference between those?
So the grocery store can sell beer, cider, wine products, which is not wine. And the package store can sell any spirits, any wine, and cider that is classified as apple wine.
Any cider.
Any cider, I'm sorry. No beer. And that's pretty much the amount. There's no alcohol in grocery stores. That was tried, I think, no alcohol or wine in grocery stores. That was tried, I think, probably over a decade ago and never went through. But in some states, that is legal.
So what's the difference between a wine product and a regular bottle of wine?
The wine product is actually not wine, although it's made with grapes. And I believe it has to be below 6%, Tom?
A wine product is wine that contains a number of other ingredients, and it's carbonated. And it has to contain all those ingredients. And it has to be under 7%.
And it's
It's the old Seagram's wine cooler.
And they bottle them now. If you walk into your local convenience store, they're bottled to look like wine, and they might even be called Chardonnay wine product on it, but it's not wine. Rest assured, and the wineries are very upset about that, and unfortunately, they're not doing anything illegal.
If you have a product that doesn't meet the definition of a wine product, it's wine and a couple of other things, but not all the things that are under the definition of a wine product, then you have something that's called a other than standard wine. And if it's under 7%, you're not going to get TTB brand label approval. So in New York State, it's a wine. But since you don't have the cola, you have to get New York State brand label registration, and it's going to be sold as a wine, meaning only a wine or liquor licensee can sell it.
So like all these, sorry, but like all of these seltzers and not beer, but not wine, but not liquor.
Those are classified for us as beer. They have a malt substitute. So the seltzers now and what we call the FMBs, the flavored malt beverages, those are all classified as beer.
And as a result, can be sold in grocery stores.
But do they have to be carbonated?
No. No, the only thing, under the ABC law, the only thing that has to be carbonated is a wine product.
And to touch upon what you just said about brand labeling, if you can kind of just give us a brief explanation of what that process is and the requirements for that.
So the process used to be, or still is, but in the near weeks it's going to change significantly, that any brand label, beer or wine, had to be approved by us. Now, wine, you would get a cola from the TTB, is that correct? And once you got the cola, then you basically get automatic approval from us. What has happened what we're in the process of doing, a law was passed, I think, over a year ago, that required us to do it in 7 days?
Well,
if it's FedEx.
The first one was so there was 2 laws passed. One was to do electronic brand label registration, which is being phased in. The second is that under the old law, if you submitted your beer or your spirits with a cola, and you did submit it by overnight mail, overnight delivery, or FedEx, UPS, or by certified mail, that if we did not answer within 30 days, it was deemed approved. Now that 30 days is 7 days.
But that's going to be a non-issue because the whole process is about to be automated, and for an additional $5, which we don't see any of, it's a third party that's doing this. You will be submitting your brand label through the computer, and it will be reviewed on the computer screen, and it will be pretty much instantaneously approved or denied. We don't deny, a very, very small percentage gets denied. And the whole process should take much less than 7 days. Right now we're on the renewal aspect of that. So renewal brand labels are being automatically brought to us, and then the approval going out that way. Within the next 3 or 4 months, I believe the new brand labels will be dealt with that way, and it should be a much more efficient process. It's all part of the same computer backroom system that I described earlier.
But when you have a cola, you don't need a brand label. It's automatic,
No, just for wine.
just for one.
Yes.
Okay, and another question from the audience. If you own and operate a winery and somebody wanted to have a private event, say a wedding at that event, do they need any special permit to serve wine to all those guests? And then are there any Department of Health or?
What kind of winery is it?
So, a farm winery.
And they're gonna cater, and they're gonna need a catering permit if they don't have a restaurant on site. Which obviously, it's a one-day permit that we get, it's only for special events.
Okay. And going to the Department of Health, are there anything that the Department of Health wants to see when there's having an event of that scale at a farm winery or a farm brewery?
Well, an event that would be temporary in nature would be one of two things. It would be an event open to the public, or it would be a private event. So an event open to the public would be a temporary food service event and would require a permit from the health department for temporary food service. If it is a private event, a wedding, as the example you've given, that is a private event. Private events are not required to be permitted by the health department. However, the caterer is required to be permitted by the health department. So, and there are any number of approved off-premises caterers in Suffolk County and outside Suffolk County as well. And these could be either standalone caterers, in other words, all they do is, backyard weddings, tent weddings, whatever, or they are generally larger restaurants or other food operations that have approval and have the equipment to conduct food service off-site.
Okay, and are there any ags and markets regulations that would relate to that, or?
So we typically do not deal with any catered events. There may be times when we are inspecting a farm-designated winery and noticing that there's a private event about to happen, and we would just make sure that that caterer has a permit through the health department. So we do confer with the health department to make sure everyone is on board with the proper permits. But we don't have any jurisdiction over catered special events.
That's a great question from the licensing perspective. One of the things you should make sure, of course, from a land use perspective, is do you have sufficient parking? And of course, are you complying with your permitted occupancy, right? If you're only allowed to have 50 people and you're contemplating a wedding for 500 people, well, you have a problem because now you're in violation of building code, fire safety code. So you need to be cognizant of more than just your licensing issues. Can you actually hold the particular event at the venue based upon the permits and the zoning designation for the particular property?
Right.
So bear that in mind as well.
That's a very good point in that obviously you're dealing with 3 different government agencies up here, some of whom, or all of whom, some of you may need a permit from or a license from to do what you do, either all the time or sometimes. But there are other government agencies, as Dave was just mentioning, that are enforcing zoning laws, are enforcing land use laws, or enforcing occupancy and building laws as well. So you need to be aware, unfortunately, that there is another level or layer of government agencies who are going to have something to say about the things that you're doing at your businesses as well.
That sort of begs a question I was thinking of, and that is, to what degree is there actually intra-government communication? Because I think these folks would like to know, between the county and the state and local municipalities, where typically the enforcement arm tends to occur through the building department, through code enforcement, sometimes through the through the authorities on a criminal level. So to what degree do you folks interact, and how often?
Well, as Angela mentioned earlier, there is a memorandum of understanding between the State Health Department and the State Department of Agriculture and Markets, and that extends from the Health Department's perspective down to the locals, which we are here, local meaning Suffolk County Health Department. So we work closely together all the time, not just me and Angela together, but our entire staffs work closely on a lot of different issues. Other state agencies and other town or local agencies, we do, Health Department, I can speak for, have contacts with them and occasionally receive referrals from them on issues that they just have a question: is this legal? Should they be doing this? Or just wanting to let us know about something. We occasionally get referrals from SLA, or we don't really have any communication with SLA at this point either, even though there does tend to be some overlap between some of our regulations. it would be, I think, in the future, maybe something that would be, we could discuss or could be discussed at the state level. There's always room for improvement in intergovernmental relations, absolutely.
And what kind of timeframes can somebody expect to see when applying to the Department of Health or to Ag and Market, just to get whatever necessary permits they need?
Well, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier about from the health department perspective, the review and approval process from the Bureau of Public Health Protection happens within, all of our plans are reviewed within 5 days. If you submit a plan that meets all the requirements, you have all the other documentation in place, you obtain approval and don't need any other agency approvals within the health department, then literally it's within 1 week you can have a pre-operational inspection and get your business open. Many times, however, there's a concurrent environmental review of the sanitary waste system that needs to occur, and as I mentioned also, that takes a little bit longer. It's a more comprehensive review, and depending on the specific intricacies of your waste handling system, can take significantly longer. So, you know, if you're simply taking over an existing business, you're not making any major changes, it's not a new business, it's not significantly renovated, you submit your application, pay your permit fee, and you can just simply unlock the door and wait for the health department to come down and inspect you.
So I can tell you from the state's, my perspective, food safety. Maybe I've spoken to some of you in here, I don't really know. But I can tell you that I can have your facility inspected the same day that you are requesting. You can apply for that license online beforehand. You can apply for that license with me or my inspector at your location. We can help you fill that out. We can mail that through. We conduct the inspection and you're ready to roll. You do not have to have the actual hard copy license in your hand to operate. We tell you, okay, everything's fine, providing there are no critical violations, of course. And then you apply for that license, you're ready. But as it was mentioned earlier, we're expecting that you're already at that position to open your door, providing that you had gone through the zoning and the buildings department and all of that stuff. Sometimes that will hold you up. But on the state's end, we can inspect you the same day that you want, providing on our schedules, we have no problem. Once you're ready to open your door, then we're ready to be there for you.
Okay, I think I want to open up to the audience for a little Q&A session.
You know, that gentleman in advance, you had a question?
Yes, on the ag and markets inspections, I've had an inspector come to my winery at one point, and I had a whole row of wine barrels up against the wall, and he noted me for a deficiency because he couldn't walk around the barrel. Where can we find what we're supposed to be doing?
So that's just part of that good manufacturing practices regulation. It will say 6 inches away from the wall, 6 inches above, off of the floor,
Yeah.
and that's all for rodent prevention. So it's not, his body doesn't have to fit through there, but we need to be able to see it so you can, your exterminator can control this properly. I mean, it's a farm, you may have a rodent running through there, we understand that, but that's the whole purpose of that. So we have regulations, they're online, you give me your email, I can send them to you. They're in the chicken coops as well.
I just want to expand that to speak to that issue for the health department. We get a question frequently, what does the health department look for when they conduct inspections? It's very, very common that, people want to know what we're looking for because you guys always seem to find violations when you get inspected. And I can tell you right now, there's very few places that exist or are currently operating that are not going to have at least one violation almost all the time. It's the way that things happen. It may not be a super critical type or a risk factor for illness type violation, but it happens. We have created and have posted on our website a lot of forms and documents to assist people who operate food operations and need information. And one of them that's most helpful in answering that question is a self-inspection checklist. And this basically is, step by step, kind of what goes through and how our inspectors are trained when they conduct inspections, just kind of in their head. So it will step you through the list of things that we're looking for with an ability for you to conduct a self-inspection and say, well, is this in compliance? Is this out of compliance? Do I not even have this in my store? My temperature's good. all of the different things that we're looking for. And it's actually a very good way to conduct what we call active managerial control, so that you are doing this on a regular basis and you are not just reacting to an inspection where we're telling you, well, this is wrong and this is wrong, now correct it. So this is really more of a proactive way to keeping your facility, your food operation in the safest possible way.
Okay, next question from the audience.
We are interested in opening a liquor store. We don't really know, where would we begin with that? Do you get the license first? Do you find a location? How would one begin?
You would find a location. Ideally, you would see whether there were a number of liquor stores in the general vicinity, since you're in a driving community. In New York City, sometimes you see them every other block, where obviously that's not ideal here. But you would see how close the surrounding liquor stores in the area are. You can go on our website to see if we've rejected any. Long Island's a very, very difficult place to open a liquor store unless you get a previously opened liquor store, because there are so many already. Pretty much every plaza in Long Island has one. So there's, that's where you'd start, is find a location, and ideally, hopefully there wouldn't be a lot of liquor stores around there. And then you would go through the application process. We have, and I still laugh at this story because it was about 3 years ago. We have board meetings every 2 weeks. Every liquor store has to come in front of me and 2 other commissioners. And this one, for about a month and a half to 2 months, this gentleman was in our audience every meeting. And he would stay till the end of the meeting, which go on for between 3 and 6 hours, depending on how long. And he would sit there, and at the end of it, finally I asked him, can we help you? Why are you here every 2 weeks? Because you're obviously not here to get a license. And he basically told me he was in the process of applying for a liquor store, and he wanted to know what it was all about before he did it. And I can guarantee you, when that guy came in front of me with his application, he got it. Because that's a guy that you want having a liquor license, because he wants to make sure he's following the law. So we can follow those meetings on the internet. And I would we do between 6 and 12 liquor stores per meeting. You can see what the calendar is beforehand, and you should check in and watch to see how, what we look for.
Yeah, one of the things you'll see when you come there is that if you're trying to open a liquor store, it is almost a surety that the other liquor stores in the region will oppose the application. And they will sometimes hire counsel who will come in and make an argument as to why this community doesn't need another liquor store. So you can get a flavor for that if you just go online to the last board meeting.
Yeah, we
There
did
were
9.
There were 8 or 9 contested liquor store applications, and you'll probably learn as much as, well, you'll learn a lot by just watching that. Not suggesting that show your idea, but it is a process you should be aware of before you start going down that road.
And I just want to add, because I see this a lot, particularly with liquor stores, make sure your lease is contingent on getting a license. Meaning, don't get yourself wrapped up in a 10-year lease without it being contingent on you getting a liquor license, because all of a sudden you get denied, there's nowhere to go and you're stuck with a 10-year lease.
I'll add to that, make sure your lease is also contingent on getting any zoning approvals you need and any permits you require. Because to Gary's point, aside from the opposition you may get from your competitors, stands to reason, I see it all the time when I have represent applicants, you make a community opposition.
That's right.
Because think of the nature of the use, right? Putting a liquor store in the community, if you're near residents, they're not going to be very happy about it. So you should sit down with your local municipality and understand the landscape of the neighborhood in which you're looking to site a particular liquor store. Make sure that A, the municipality supports it, and B, find out what kind of civic organizations are in the area and do a little community outreach if necessary, because it's in your own best interest. If you don't have the support from either or both, sometimes that can be more of a problem than getting their support.
And when you're finding that location, particularly with package stores, there's something called the 200-foot law. Which means you have to be more than 200 feet, and if it's on the same street as a school or a place of worship. There was an old Stewart's, old convenience store in my village, and somebody moved their package store to that spot while their application was pending. They moved all the inventory there. Those of us who live in the village know, right across the street from that Stewart's was a synagogue. So that person left their old lease, got a new lease for this place, and now can't get a license.
Don't let that discourage you, though. Go ahead.
Other than that,
Since you asked the question, I'll remember it. And I can't guarantee anything, but we'll work with you.
Sir?
Yes.
If you're a brewery who already has the paperwork submitted for final approval, do you guys see any extended delays from the current 25-week period?
Meaning go longer than this?
Yeah.
I better not, or I'm not gonna be up here much longer, so. No, I don't.
Is there anything that they could do to speed up their application process?
Make it, and I'm sure most of you, particularly the manufacturers, are using some type of outside assistance. The biggest issue we have with applications is the lack of competent assistance. You would be shocked, and having practiced law for over 20 years, I'm shocked at some of the work that I see that comes into our agency. So when the most important thing is find a competent person to help you, whether it be you don't have to have an attorney to do a liquor license. You don't have to have any help at all. You can do it yourself. But if you are going to get help, make sure that it's competent help, that you get a referral. The attorney, we do have a program where in our agency, if an attorney is the one submitting for a client, we have what's called self-certified applications by the attorney. They generally move quicker through the agency because there's certain things that the attorney is attesting to, basically putting his license on the line, that this is abiding by all laws of the ABC law, and as a result, we don't look at that. If that attorney gets caught lying to us, then he's obviously not going to be practicing in front of us and perhaps anywhere. So that, if you want to move it quicker, that's one way to move it quicker. But the biggest thing is get competent help, because when we find a deficiency in an application, we then have to write you a letter and say, solve these deficiencies. That takes 10 days to 2 weeks. Then and frequently we get the response, and the response isn't complete. We have to send another letter. There are individuals out there that are excellent at this, and we get no deficiencies. So that's the one main thing I would say.
Yes.
I have a question. Why can you not buy wine at the grocery store in New York State and you can in New Jersey or North Carolina? And if there is an old law, will they ever change it?
Well, it is illegal now. It's not illegal in those states. I have nothing to do with the legislative process. I'm required to enforce it as it comes to me, so the best person you can speak to about that is your legislator. Why that is the case and we can't here, I couldn't tell you. I know when it was proposed, I was not doing this, so I don't know what the conversations were, but that's something you really should take up with your legislator. They're the ones that propose those laws.
Yeah.
If I may be allowed to assist you. Years ago, when they started setting up grocery stores, they would not allow in New York State grocery stores or supermarkets to sell wine or spirits, etc. And so there were countervailing package stores next to or across the street from the grocery stores. And there was a big issue maybe about 10 years ago where somebody wanted to move in and put wine and other things in the grocery stores, and the net result was that there was pushback from all of the package stores that were associated with the grocery stores.
Yeah, I would say it was a little louder than pushback.
Yeah, okay, thanks. That's my point.
A question.
Yes.
Going back to the marketing permit for farm winery, can you clarify what is permitted, whether it's tastings, sales of tastings, or sales by the glass?
All right, under the marketing permit, which is available to any manufacturer, even the distillers who can do tastings at their distillery, it allows you to do tastings, which means for free. You can't charge for them. If you charge for a tasting, that's a sale. All right. The marketing permit sets out the size of the samples. Okay? So it's tastings and sales by the bottle, sales for off-premises consumption. With the marketing permit, you can conduct that activity at a farmer's market, state fair, county fair, a not-for-profit event, and a place that has a license to sell that product, a retailer. all right? You can do that without notifying us. Your marketing permit just lets you do that. If you want to go someplace else, you want to set up a day in a shopping mall, set up a little kiosk, all right? Then you have to give us 15 days notice. We're not going to let you set up that kiosk for the holiday season. This is supposed to be a one-day kind of event, all right? But that's generally speaking how it works. The marketing permit is $375 for 3 years. And to be honest, I don't know now what our policy is, so I think we changed it. If you have multiple licenses, if we're going to make you get two permits or not.
Okay, so absolutely no sales of.
You can, no. Only for off-premises, by the bottle, so to speak. They're buying it and going. If you charge a dime for a sample, that's a sale. If you're at an event where you have to pay to get in, right, you can use your marketing permit, but whoever's holding the event has to have a temporary beer and wine permit, because technically they're charging for someone to have your sample, because you can't get in without paying.
What if it's at another licensed premise? So, for example, all the farm wineries wanted to get together at a single farm winery and hold a tasting.
Yeah, because the farm winery is licensed to sell New York State label wines. So you could go there for a day and with your marketing permit and do tastings and bottle sales.
But can I have another winery come into my room?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
Okay, we'll do one more question.
Or, we have two questions, so the last two questions.
Okay, this is a question for Steve. And it has to do with nonprofit events. We do a lot of these charity events where we have a big tent and everybody's there pouring samples. I think I heard you say before that everyone has to get a temporary permit.
If you're providing food or beverage, yes.
Okay, the Wine Council used to have an arrangement with Suffolk County Health under which if a winery guaranteed that they would not be serving food or putting ice in their wines and tables, that they would be exempt from that permit. Is that still in force? And if so, couldn't it be extended to?
I'm not sure exactly where that came from. I've been with the department for 20 years, and I've not heard of that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, or something that wasn't enforced previously, but it's certainly something that we'd consider. So if you want to have a chat offline, we can do that.
Last question? Yes.
Can you tell us about the licensing requirements for an online retailer to be able to sell wine as part of the gift box set?
There's no such thing.
Yeah, what he's saying is you have to have a brick and mortar wine store to do it.
But go ahead if you
Right,
want to
so-
expand on that.
So only licensees, retail licensees, package stores, wine stores can sell through direct shipping to New York State residents and the wineries. But that requires, as the chairman said, a brick and mortar location. You have to have a licensed premises. From there, you can do the sales. You can't just have a business. Now, you can do predominantly that. I know there's wine.com has a tiny little package store, right? And does most of their business online. That's fine, but you need to get that package store license.
She can ship wine out of New York State, and it's legal, but can't ship it in New York State?
She's not. It sounds like she's not even licensed, so she shouldn't be shipping anything.
Oh, wait, that's a
But
whole lot.
I was just going to comment on the wine.com to show you how small it needs to be. I think they're under 400 square feet. They have one person in there, and they might get 2 customers a month in their store. But behind it is a 30,000 square foot warehouse that is just wine, and they're shipping all over the state.
Just had a question about the roadside market. There's a 20-mile restriction. Is that, first of all, if you have multiple sites, 3 or 4 farms, but your winery is in one location, can it be used on any of those farms?
I will.
And then
So the wineries don't get this license. Okay? This is for the farmer who isn't making wine.
Okay, but I want to sell him the wine.
Yeah.
And it has to be within 20 miles of my location.
Right.
And is it as the bird flies, is it for my farm that might be in Riverhead as opposed to my winery, which is in Cutchogue?
It's wherever your licensed farm winery is.
So if you have multiple farms up and down the fork, it doesn't extend the 20 miles.
No, it's wherever your licensed farm winery is.
And it's
that's
a
where-
it's a
right.
radius.
Okay, it is a radius,
Yeah.
so like 20 miles I could sell to the South Fork because as a bird flies, it might be within 20 miles from.
Yeah, I mean, that's gonna be very liberally interpreted for obvious reasons. That's
Yeah.
why it was enacted.
Okay.
All right, so I want to thank the panel. Thank you very much. We'll be here for a little while. If you have any questions offline, food and lunch is being served, then we'll pick up with our second panel. And Economic State Development's here, FTRC is here, SBDC is here. So if you've got questions, you've got the Health Department, you have Ag to Market and SLA. So enjoy lunch.